Alrighty, hi everyone. We're just going to give it one more minute here for a couple last minute people to trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, great. And we are recording, so we will send out the recording after. So we're going to go ahead and get started right on time here. And welcome everyone to the event this morning. Today is a joint presentation between Interloop and Fivetran, and we're going to talk about from chaos to clarity. So we're going to go through unified analytics with managed data lake on top of OneLake. So the agenda for today is we're going to start with some poll questions to kind of gauge where the audience is in their journey. We'll go through introductions of the speakers, a quick Fabric overview, how Interloop and Fivetran support OneLake, and then we have a really compelling demo for you all that talks about supporting a manufacturing company getting ready to be ready for AI. And then we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A questions between the audience and the presenters. So starting with the first poll question, you will see a question pop up on your screen for you to participate in answering. But we would really like to know where you are in your data lake journey. Maybe you don't know what a data lake is yet. You have one, but it's not used. Let's see. That you have the data is fully unified in the data lake, or you're driving analytics and AI outcomes already using your data lake. So you go ahead and drop your answers in there, and we'll give it a minute, and then we'll see what the results are. And the results should come through here in the chat. On the top of your screen, if you click in the chat, you should be able to see those. So it looks like we kind of have a tie here going between we have a data lake, but it's not used, and our data is fully unified in our data lake. And then we even have a couple outliers in what is a data lake. Well, good thing we're going to talk through all of that in our presentation today. And then we have a second poll question for you all attending is what technologies are you using to support your data lake strategy? Are you ADLS and OneLake only? Azure Synapse Analytics, Microsoft Fabric, other, or TBD/unknown. We should see this poll question pop up here in just a moment for you to send over your answer.
Apologies, folks, some technical difficulties back here.
No problem. Typing on the fly under pressure.
The app just crashed, so I'm going to ask you all to actually just pop your answer into chat. It will remain anonymous. Thank you.
All right, we're seeing some answers coming through now. We're seeing some Microsoft Fabrics, and other TBD/unknown, second Fabric here. All right, so we're a little dispersed here, which is great. So today we're going to talk about Microsoft Fabric to support this data strategy, but if you're looking for some resources on other potential angles, feel free to reach out to us and we can definitely send over some resources afterwards. But let's get started with the bulk of this presentation. We'll take a minute here for introductions. So good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Frost, and I am the manager of data and AI at Interloop. And I'll be playing MC and then also going through the demo with you later today in this presentation. And I'll pass it over to Jordan to introduce himself.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'm excited to be here today. So I'm Jordan Berry, CEO and co-founder of Interloop. I'm excited to be joined with our partners, Fivetran, to help talk through all of this great content.
Hi everyone, so Dave Millman, I'm a partner solution engineer here at Fivetran. So basically my goal is to make sure that customers and partners alike are successful with data.
Great. And I will pass it back to Jordan to start us off. David, sorry, starting with David.
So some of you may not be familiar with Fivetran and what we do. We're essentially a data movement tool. And so you may ask, why another data movement tool? And so our specialty is really making data as simple as reliable as electricity. You can plug in and charge your phone, go up to a socket and just, charge your phone. We want to do the same thing for electricity. And the way that we do that is in about 15 minutes, you can actually connect to everything from Salesforce to SAP and move that data into your data lake, configure that and get that running. And so the benefit and what the differentiation is for our customers is, if you think about the large, like Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, they have 400 plus different data sources. They're trying to push that into a data lake. If you do the simple math by moving that data through typical ETL tools, take 400 times 8 weeks to get in there, you actually very quickly come up to 60 man years worth of effort just to move that data. The equivalent, assuming a week per pipeline, and that gives plenty of scope for all the creep and all the problems that you'll find, will take us 4 years. So we've basically saved you 56 years to move that 400 data sources. And then once we've done that, we not only move that data across, we keep it consistent. So we're doing CDC on every pipeline. We manage things like schema evolution and everything else. All those things that you've typically got woken up at 2 in the morning because they've failed and broken the systems. We take care of all of that for you. So that's kind of a quick intro into Fivetran and what we do.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Want to do a quick intro of Interloop as well. I know we've partnered with Fivetran to help really clients take advantage of that data movement capabilities. But at Interloop, we're your trusted Microsoft Fabric partner. So really helping clients from that full life cycle journey, whether you're thinking about something like Fabric all the way to delivering outcomes on a consistent basis, we want to be that trusted guide throughout the entire process. So really what we talk about is how can you deliver data analytics and AI solutions faster? These are really powerful tools, but they don't know your business. How do we, in partnership with you as the client, work to build these solutions that are really tailored and unique for your organization so you can stay competitive, so that you can make really strategic moves. And we want to provide kind of a very trustworthy and guided approach to that. So, really excited to be here with Fivetran. We always see that as a key enabler of the speed to deliver faster. And so just excited to talk through kind of data lakes, data warehouses, and all this comes together so that you can deliver those solutions faster. And so I think we just wanted to jump in. So I'll talk through a little bit of kind of backdrop around data lakes, data warehouses. I know then we'll pass it to David to kind of give his point of view, and then we'll wrap up with Megan's demo as well. But I did want to just start at kind of the 101. I think it was good hearing in the polls that we had some folks that were still asking, kind of what is a data lake and what are these kind of core technologies? And candidly, it's quite easy to get lost in all the vernacular and the words that come out. There's so many buzzwords and they're constantly changing. And so I wanted to kind of just take it back to basics on, what is a data lake or a data warehouse. And so really, if you kind of break it down, the evolution of this, we're probably all familiar with the database, which is another term, just a place that you store transactional data, whether that's customer orders or product catalogs, we're all probably pretty aware of what that is. the challenge becomes, let's say you're running a lot of transactions in your day-to-day workflow. Now you want to actually analyze that data. You want to look at, loads of historical data. You want to compare things. That's where a tool like a data lake or a data warehouse comes in, is how do you go from that transactional type need of speed and reliability to now I want to do some really unique analysis to kind of understand my business, understand historically how we've done, and then even probably more importantly, starting to look to the future and how can I use this data to make decisions. And so if you break it down, really kind of when you think about a data lake versus a data warehouse, the data warehouse really kind of came first. So, out of the evolution of a database, we needed a place that we could populate, a copy of this data so that we can aggregate it, analyze it, do whatever we want with it without causing any sort of strain on those daily operational systems. And so when you think about a data warehouse, it's just really a big database in some ways. You've got your structured data. It's a place that business analysts and business users can come in and run queries. You can handle it in batch. You can do things that are, very high level in terms of aggregating data, et cetera. And that was a really powerful tool for the longest time. The challenge became, what happens when you have unstructured data? Things like images and video or, PDFs, all this stuff where a lot of rich data lives, but is not very easily accessible. That's really where the origination of a data lake came in, was, imagine a world where not only could I store all my, relational data, my transactional type data, but I can have all that data sitting right next to my images, my PDFs, my videos, et cetera. And so when you think about a data lake, the biggest analogy I like is just a big folder at the end of the day. So everyone has, a folder on their desktop. A data lake is essentially a big folder, and that can live, on premise or in the cloud. A lot of folks are obviously thinking about cloud because it's much more scalable and manageable, but you can think of a data lake as just a big folder. And so what you can do is you can actually put that transactional data, you can put those images, you can put them in different folders. You can add a bunch of naming conventions to them. So, organizing your data by year, month, day, by category, et cetera. It's really just a way to kind of organize that data. The magic comes in as soon as you start to think about AI. So if your only use case is analytics, a data warehouse is probably good enough. It'll get it done. You can do analytics. The second you want to allow AI to be able to access some of that data, that's really where this data lake or lake first strategy comes in, because the AI may want to ask traditional analytics questions of the data, but it may also want to look at some of the images and make some assertions based on the content of a PDF, et cetera. And so we're seeing more and more clients starting to shift to that data lake strategy, simply because it kind of future proofs where you're going. So that's kind of one element. We'll talk a little bit more about this too, but the cost is another big one. So if you can think about a data warehouse as that expensive database that you have to host and manage, the data lake is a much lighter folder of data. And so when you look at the actual underlying infrastructure cost, it's about 100x cheaper than data warehouses tend to be for data storage. So some pretty compelling stuff. But really, to just break it down, start simple. Data lake is structured and unstructured data in a folder, and a data warehouse is more of simply your structured data aggregated outside. And so I wanted to shift focus. I know we got quite a few folks on the webinar interested in Fabric or using Fabric today. How does that kind of agnostic data lake concept play in the Microsoft ecosystem? And so if you're familiar with, historically, Microsoft has had what's called blob storage or ADLS, Azure Data Lake Storage. OneLake is really just the next evolution of that journey. So like I mentioned, the data lake being really just a big folder in the cloud, that's really what OneLake is. Now they've got a lot of additional things that we'll talk through that make the data, much more structured and organized. Maybe people are familiar with, what's called a data swamp, where basically you've got a data lake, but all the files that get in there, they're messy, they're not very organized. You can often end up with a bit of a mess. OneLake takes care of a lot of those administration and management challenges. And so when you think about Fabric, it really is a holistic platform built on top of that data lake concept. So, imagine OneLake as that data lake we just talked about. As an organization, you're able to put all of your, transactional data, image data, PDFs, form data, et cetera, all in one place. You've got really just simply one copy of that data. And then on top of that is all of these different tools. So if you're, trying to, transform data, you can use tools like Data Factory. If you're trying to do some data science, you can use some of the advanced machine learning tools. If you're trying to visualize that data, you can use things like Power BI, or maybe you want to do some real-time alerting and kind of actioning based on changes in the data. You can use things like the real-time intelligence or data activator. And so really like the structure. I think it's pretty visionary of Microsoft to say, we're going to standardize on a data lake, and then we're going to give each of the individuals across the organization the tool they need on top of that data. And so what this looks like in practice is that you really truly have one copy of data for your organization. You don't have a bunch of different teams creating different data sets. I can't tell you how many times we come into a meeting and one person has one number for a metric and somebody else has a different one. Which one do you trust? A lot of those challenges start to go by the wayside when you're using a platform like Microsoft Fabric. So obviously there's a lot more under the covers. I know we've got a lot of other content on some of the individual key pieces of this. But in terms of talking about how a data lake really powers your analytics and AI strategy, OneLake really is a revolutionary tool in terms of how we support these different use cases with one copy of data. And what does this really look like, in practice? Because, like I said, it's just a folder, right? But underneath the covers, this is kind of what you can think about in terms of OneLake. So if you're familiar with kind of the existing Power BI infrastructure or existing platform, the way that you organize things is through workspaces, which again is really just a folder within the folder, not to go too meta, but the idea is that within OneLake, which is your data lake, you can then have these different workspaces. And then within each workspace, you can actually have multiple what they call lake houses, which combine both kind of folders and files. And so if you look on the left-hand side, let's take the example of workspace A. I've got two lake houses. And the reason I might do two lake houses is just simply that I've got one team working on, the dashboard. I've got one team working on a data science model. We may not want them to be bumping into each other from a daily workflow standpoint, but they are relying on that same copy of data underneath. And so if you look at the bottom, like we mentioned earlier, you've got all these different types of outputs. You can get a Power BI data set. You can consume data through other lake houses. You can actually treat it like it's a data warehouse, even though it's those files and folders that we talked about. And you can even get into kind of the real-time streaming type world where, especially taking a manufacturing example, imagine a plant that has all these different sensors and data that's streaming into the lake house. You can now actually react in real time based on some of those insights. And one of the kind of key breakthroughs as part of OneLake that I wanted to highlight was, we mentioned the data swamp, this idea that you just throw files in there, they get messy. I'm sure anybody, your own desktop on your computer gets messy over time if you really don't, manage and monitor it. One of the key transitions was Microsoft Fabric licensed a technology called Delta Lake. This actually came from Databricks originally, but the idea is that it's a standardized way to store that data in a data lake. So if you look here on the right-hand side, this is actually underneath the covers how that data is stored. So you've got, let's say, a table, which is really a folder. Within that table, you've got your actual raw data, which is stored in a Parquet type file, which is prepped and ready for analysis. But then you've also got this Delta log folder, which is quite interesting. Anytime there's something that's changing in the data, it gets logged within that same folder. So you can do things like see which records were updated or deleted. You can see over time kind of effectively snapshots of the data. What did this folder look like, 3 months ago versus today? And so it's a really quite brilliant, quite simple approach to storing this data. And the magic of this is that it just looks like a database at the end of the day. So even though you're storing the data as a file, it's very cheap to store, very cheap to access. It's organized in a way that can support even the most advanced use cases. And we're talking terabytes of data that you can query and analyze here. So some pretty compelling stuff in terms of how it's structured. And really, if we take this back to the business use case, why does this all matter, right? Like, I'm excited about folders, it's cheaper, it's faster, et cetera. But like I mentioned at the beginning, really the goal is how do you support multiple outcomes? How do you future-proof your analytics approaches so that you can actually support both, visualization, AI, reverse ETL, maybe things you haven't even thought about as an organization yet. If you take this lake first strategy, you're actually able to take all the raw data, move it through, and then focus on those outcomes over time. So what you're seeing here is a bit of an interface from Fabric. A little bit of a teaser. I think Megan will be highlighting this a little bit later. But if you look at kind of the left to the right, you can think of this as kind of the data refinery. So we've got all this raw data that's coming from those different sources. And I know, David, you're going to touch on this in here in just a moment. We then actually get that data organized and ready for use. But really the key is that I've got these different outcomes. So maybe I want to build an executive dashboard that we run our business on, or maybe I want to custom train a copilot so it can answer the questions that I have about my business. Or maybe I want to build a predictive model that helps me, adapt and stay competitive within my industry. Or maybe I even want to sync some of that data. A good use case of this is in the advertising world. I want to push my audiences out to the different advertising platforms. Because I've adapted a lake first strategy, I know that I can use that one copy of data for all of these different use cases. So a bit of an analytics breakthrough just in the last couple of years. So super excited about that. But as we know, the first step is to get all that data in. And so I'd love to pass it to David to talk through, how can we make sure that we don't have those 60 man years of effort and we can get there a little bit faster. So.
Okay, awesome. So what does Fivetran bring to this? So we realized a few years ago how big data lakes were going to be. And just to give a bit of background, I was at Cloudera, so I went through data lakes version 1 in the enterprise. I understand the challenges. I've seen all of the things around data swamps and everything else. And there's a couple of things that really sort of make sure that you don't get into that thing, right? It's consistency. How do I bring data in consistently from any source? And how do I make sure when that data is brought in that it's actually registering with the right catalogs, it's in the right file format, it's acting as you want it to be. And that's the one thing across those 400 systems that we're going to bring in for our customers, that we're going to make sure that data is consistent and is in the format that you want it to be. So, I take my SAP system, I go and load that data into OneLake. We're going to make sure that if I've got a purchase order going into that we're going to make that table that appears within OneLake, that it appears like a relational table. So you can do that reporting that says, what are my current state of orders? And as you saw when Justin went through and looked at like the file structure, there's a lot of things underneath that need to be changed or potentially updated as part of that. We take care of all of that on your behalf. So that's really the other big thing. One thing. Then the other big thing is with a data lake, you suddenly realize that you can do other types of analytics. If you went to any enterprise 10, 15 years ago, in their data warehouse, they turned around and said, basically, I'm storing, 13 months worth of sales figures, right? That was kind of like the maximum they could do because of cost. Data Lake suddenly changed that. And so they want the ability to now, instead of storing 13 months worth of data, I want, 10 years worth of all my behavior on my website. And so using things like type 2 slowly changing dimension, which is just a pick box on the Fivetran UI, I can now store that type 2 data. So I now have all of that information available to my analysts to go and do their AI trends and everything else in there. The other big thing that we're seeing, which is almost like a side effect here, is if you go into the cloud, everyone is looking at costs, right? So on one hand, they want all the functionality of a data warehouse. They want the size and flexibility of a data lake, and they don't want it at the same cost that they were going out before. And so if you look at non-data lake cloud platforms, they are running, every time I do an insert into a cloud database, that cloud server has to be up and running for me to go and do that. For a managed data lake where we're just pushing essentially data to Parquet files to Azure, when we do that, you don't have to have any third-party servers up and running. So you can get 20% cost savings by going to a data lake just purely on the ingest. So, we're seeing cases where customers are running in just 24/7, but they're only doing analytics for 12 to 14 hours. So run those analytics servers for that 12 to 14 hours, but allow your environment to have all of that data coming in 24/7. So that's kind of a quick overview of the benefits of the data lake service. And if we go to the next slide, we kind of put a wrapper around kind of what all of this means and expectation, right? So ultimately, the business side of whatever organization we work with is looking to get more value out of their data. That is really where it needs to be. And that is what they focus on and will determine the success of your projects. And, if I deliver $1 worth of value today, they're going to want $5 tomorrow, and it's going to be 20 the day after. And that's really the expectation. That's what all the material around, AI and everything else gives. Underneath the line, the average IT organization is kind of in this mix of all things going on. We've got 20% maintenance. We've got 20, a set of modernization practices going on. There are strategic project, investments that the board has made, and then there's stuff that just happens, right? And so what we need to do is optimize all of those, take out any of the extra unwanted costs, so you can focus on building that value at the top. And I'm going to give a quick story of just to sort of show you the kind of a scenario of what this means and what happens when all of this works. So I was at I got a call one day from a customer in a previous life. And they said they were using a ETL tool and saying, okay, then we're going to throw out your tool. Your product doesn't work. And I said, well, why is that? I said, well, what happens is and this was a CMO, they said, I want to answer a question. And I said, okay, then we'll walk me through it. And she said, you know what? Started off great. We sat down. We came out with our definition and our scoping project, and they said it would be 8 weeks. Okay, great. After 8 weeks, that all worked, and that came out, and she got her result. But we all know what happens at that point. She ultimately wants to ask another question. And the following answer was shocking, right? It was when they said, I want to ask that second question, the project team said it's going to be another 6 to 8 weeks to go and build the pipeline, the infrastructure, and everything else out there. So if you take that from a CMO's perspective, that's two new questions that she can ask each quarter. And that graph does not match what we're showing on the screen. By using a data lake, by using Fivetran, she could actually get to that point where she's asking multiple questions in the same day. So we've gone from 2 questions a quarter to, let's say 1 a day, 90 questions a quarter that she can answer, as being a fundamental business shift. And that's really, all of the technology and everything else is great. But ultimately, when we think of success, that's kind of what we need to be doing. And that's what we're saying today can be done with all the tools. So.
Yeah, I think that's really compelling, David. Just the ability to move so much faster. There's the hard benefits and even the soft benefits of that, right? Which is pretty fantastic. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to that end, I know, David, you talked about kind of moving at the speed of business, going from kind of a quarterly outlook to now this, daily cadence and motion, and what that looks like is that not only are you able to answer questions, but as a data team, you're able to deliver these products where people can then self-service on some of those questions and that type of thing as well. And so one of the things we just like to highlight is, what is some of the ROI around this speed and this acceleration of data. And so a lot of times what we hear is that first one is really exactly what you just spoke to. If you get your data unified, you can now save your organization time because folks are able to self-service and ask and answer their own questions on top of that data. Let's say you want to empower your executive team with things like, dashboards. That's what we call Fast Dash. That really helps the organization increase agility because you're able to, gauge what's happening in the business and take action really quickly. We're seeing a lot of productivity gains in terms of, custom copilots and these AI type solutions where, not only now is it answering questions, but it's actually doing some things on your behalf, like, what's an issue for our organization, and not only identify that, but actually go resolve it for us. And then we're seeing a lot of excitement around this concept of reverse ETL. And I know there was an exciting announcement just recently that Fivetran acquired Census, which is one of our other partners. So really focusing around this idea of how do I put the right data in the hands of the people that need it. So imagine some of those insights getting pushed out to salespeople or customer service people that are interacting with the customers daily. You can really reduce that risk around, knowing your customer and being able to service them. So this might just help as you're thinking about your own businesses and how can this apply. These are some of the tangible outcomes that come from all of this type of effort. And so I think to make it even more tangible, would love to pass to Megan to walk through kind of a sample scenario of this, and we can kind of show in practice, how this might look and feel for an organization that's leveraging both, Fabric and Fivetran to deliver on these solutions.
Great, thanks, Jordan. So we're going to set the scene here for the demo, and we're going to use a fictitious company, Palmetto EV, which is an electric and low-speed vehicle manufacturer based in South Carolina. And our CTO said to the business that one of the main initiatives this year was to enhance analytics and the adoption of AI tools. And we also want to make data more accessible to the organization so everyone in any department can make data back decisions faster. So as a company, Palmetto EV, we've already chosen Microsoft Fabric as our unified data platform and Fivetran as our tool for ETL. But our siloed data is still preventing us from fully utilizing analytics and AI capabilities that come with Microsoft Fabric. We need this data platform or data estate setup to be able to handle both structured and unstructured data. So we're going with the lakehouse strategy, but we don't want to manage these complex infrastructures or have high levels of maintenance. So we're going to leverage MLDS and OneLake to land ERP and CRM data into Fabric. And then we're going to use Power BI and Copilot on top of it to create intelligent solutions to help make this initiative work. So we're going to take a look at how all of this works together. And I'm going to steal the screen from Jordan so we can walk through this demo. Okay. So starting with Microsoft Fabric, if you've used Power BI in the past and published a dashboard to the online service, you'll see this setup in UX is very familiar. We still have workspaces, we have the home button, etc. But Microsoft has added another persona on top of Power BI, which you can switch back and forth to in the bottom left-hand corner here between Fabric and Power BI. And Fabric adds all of this one-stop shop for all things data engineering, data science, and data analytics. But the issue here is that one of the challenges is that this is just a set of tools. Microsoft doesn't default any type of setup or opinion to workspaces or provisioning of resources. It's all up to the discretion of the user or the organization. And this is what you get when you spin up a workspace, just this blank canvas. And then when you go to add something new, there's over 40 things to choose from. So how do you know where to start? It's a little overwhelming. And so this is where Interloop can help. We bring expertise and opinion to Microsoft Fabric platform. This task flow that Jordan showed earlier highlights the architecture standard that Interloop follows, which is the medallion architecture. And then we add on a proprietary opinion that we call Orbit. And so like Jordan mentioned earlier, the medallion approach acts as a refinery for the data. As you move from bronze to silver to gold, the cleaner and more organized the data becomes. However, we always like to think about beginning with the end in mind. And so I know my business initiative for the year is AI solutions and analytics solutions. But how I prepare my data for both of those outcomes is different. Dashboards often require a more dimensional model approach, and AI requires more flattened data that can be easily vectorized and searched. So adding this orbit component on top of Medallion allows me to take this best in breed approach and develop the model that will create the most efficient outcome, while also creating a level of insulation around the models to protect from downstream breakage if anything is adjusted. And we're happy to send over more information on this approach after the session if there's any interest. Just feel free to drop a comment in the chat or send us an email directly. But in order to get all of this set up, we actually need data landed in Fabric. So we're going to flip over quickly to the interface, to Fivetran interface, to kind of show how simple it is to set up and land data. So starting with Fivetran, there's over 700 connectors that you can pick, have your choice here of what kind of data that you want to land. An example that we've chosen here, if we flip into what an actual connector looks like, is Salesforce. So this is our CRM data. And you can see on this schema, you can pick the table down to you can specifically pick the tables that you want to send over to Fabric. So it's really easy setup, really easy to be unique in how you set things up as well. And it's a great UX here that Fivetran has developed. So if we flip back over to Fabric, our engineers handle all of the data loading. They've got it all landed for me. They've created this model. We're going to go into an actual lakehouse here associated with an outcome. So if I click on this lakehouse, you'll see that all of my tables are showing up. And it really looks like it's a database that I can use. But really, like Jordan mentioned, it's Delta underneath. And Fabric is great because there's so many positives to this format. And the Delta default allows us for time travel capabilities, high performance because of the compaction and indexing that Delta allows. And it supports schema evolution and cost efficiency. And then I can also switch here to the SQL analytics endpoint and query these tables with SQL. Super user friendly and very familiar to what a database interaction would be like. But all of this acts as my foundation to build outcomes on top of. So the first outcome we're going to talk through is a process that Interloop calls Fast Dash. And so we're going to dive into this Power BI report here. This specific dashboard combines ERP and CRM data and is built in Power BI. And although it's not shown in this demo, we've actually taken this dashboard and embedded it into Salesforce for our sales reps. So they can access all of this information directly in the application that they use every day. Because sales representatives aren't necessarily in your unified data platform every day, they're in your CRM. We wanted to create one less platform for them to log into, but they still need all of this contextual data to do their jobs and make data-driven decisions. So if you want more information on how to embed a Power BI dashboard like this, just let us know and we can also send over some resources for that. Another solution that we created on top of this data foundation for our AI initiative is a data agent within Fabric, which will allow us to interact with data in our data lake in natural language. And while this particular feature is still in preview, we can already see how profound the performance is and how hard that Microsoft is working to really enable everyone to use AI in their day-to-day work. So if we flip over here to this demo sales agent, these agents can have different sources to be grounded on. They can be grounded on warehouses, Power BI semantic models, or KQL databases. And with the data agent, People without technical expertise in AI or a deep understanding of the data structure can receive precise and context-rich answers about the data that they need. And this Fabric data agent particularly fosters a culture of data-driven decision-making because it lowers the barriers to insight accessibility and it facilitates collaboration. You can ask questions in natural language. You don't have to create a SQL query every time that you're trying to ask questions of your data. So this particular feature is very, very cool. And I've preloaded this agent with historical sales data from 2011 to 2014 about products, customers, the geography of the sales, the territories, internet sales, and reseller sales. And we're going to use this data lake as the source to ground this AI agent on. And we can ask questions about customer details, time-based events, sales territories, product sales, etc. And so to set this up, it was very, very simple. It was a click of a button by clicking the new, like I showed you in the very beginning. I've directed this to my Lakehouse source. And then I've provided some instructions for this agent. Pretty simple instructions. It just gives some descriptions of the tables, what DIM geography is, what DIM product is, etc. And then I've also supplied it with some examples. Here's a question, and then the corresponding SQL statement of how I would answer this question if I was a data engineer querying this data lake. Pretty simple setup. And so because this feature is still in Fabric, I've gone ahead and pre-populated my discussion with this agent in another tab so that we don't have any technical mishaps on this call. But say a use case here is I'm a marketing coordinator and I'm trying to determine the best place to place a boosted geo-targeted ad for Palmetto EV's 12th anniversary trade-in promotion. So I want to look at historical sales to see which bikes were bought historically and where my ads could reach the best audience because I want to get the most bang for my buck. So we're going to use the data agent as a marketing coordinator who's not savvy in SQL to answer questions of the data so that I can tailor my ads to the correct audience. So we're going to start by just listing the product categories by total internet sales. Maybe it was a bike, maybe it was accessories or something else. So here we can see that the agent gave a very robust response within the categories. And I can even click in here and see the specific SQL that it queried the database with. So this data agent is pretty smart. It added joins, grouped by, and even ordered it in a descending amount. Okay, so now I know that the category is bikes had the most internet sales, but I want to know which specific bike had the most ones. So I ask a leading question, which bike had the most internet sales? And the agent queried again, gave me back the answer, Mountain 200 Black. You can see here the SQL that it ran to do this. But this still doesn't give me all the information I need. So I'm just continuing to have a conversation and we go through, and ultimately through just some simple questions, I figured out that Melbourne, Australia had the most of these bikes. So now I know as the marketing coordinator, I'm going to geo-target my ads to this city in hopes that more people will take advantage of this trade-in opportunity for my ads. So we can see that these data agents really do create accessibility for anyone in the organization to ask questions of data and really make these data-backed decisions. So this is just one version of an AI solution that Microsoft Fabric offers. There's many, many more, but hopefully this gives an idea of the full life cycle of how data can be utilized with the Lake strategy all the way through to solution that you can bring to your organization. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I think we'll pass it to Jordan to pop up the screens here. And so that concludes our demo, but now we're going to transition over to Q&A. So let's see if we have any questions that have come through.
Awesome. Just and like to say, Meg, that was an impressive demo. Really cool to see how we went from raw data from multiple sources into not only analytics but AI. All powered by Fivetran and Fabric. So wow, that was pretty impressive to see. So um, yeah, with that, would love to welcome any Q&A, any questions. We can see which came in through the chat window while we were presenting there. So
Let's see. I saw someone typing, but we'll wait and see if another one pops up. But I did have someone send over some questions directly, so we can start with those. So first question is for the presenters. What is the benefit of leveraging additional tooling outside of Fabric to bring data in and organize it within Fabric?
I guess I'll take that one. It's really the cool thing is, hey, the functionality that you just showed, the ability to answer a question and get a response out requires a whole lot of things out there, right? And the great thing is you can answer any question now of that data. The power of those tools is to be good citizens with Microsoft to make sure that that data is put in the right place at the right time, and that the question is you can only answer a question where that data is available. So the whole ecosystem has to be there to make sure that that is successful. I took a tangent of that, but that's kind of where I was going.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead,
Maybe I
Jordan.
could just echo David's
Mhm.
comments there too. Is really it all comes back in my point of view to that speed element, right? So there are some tools within Fabric that can help you with data movement, but as you've got to spend data engineering time and energy to set it up, get it managed, make sure it continues to work throughout. Tools like Fivetran manage all those additional things that a lot of data engineers are kind of the bane of their existence, that they're constantly having to kind of keep these pipelines up and running. So yeah, so definitely agree with you, David. I think that's a key element of why that's important.
Great. So a question we got through in the chat is, in the demo, was Explorer the actual AI agent within Fabric, or was that just a landing area utilizing Copilot or some other agent? That's a great question. This is a preview feature of an agent directly in Fabric. So you can create the interface right in the workspace and ground it off of whatever Lakehouse or KQL database or Power BI semantic model that you choose as the foundation for your data, and then you start creating those questions right there. It's been a little buggy in terms of what I've been seeing with, but you will be able to publish these data agents that you create into a more accessible spot for people to access. So we're hoping that you can eventually start to publish these into Teams so that people won't have to access Fabric natively to interact with these agents. We believe that's on the roadmap for Microsoft coming up. Okay, another question. Let's see here. Okay, how do Interloop and Fivetran empower AI, specifically agentic workloads?
So, John, do you want to take the first stab and I'll support
Yeah.
that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, and maybe I'll start with kind of the end in mind. So, in terms of agentic workloads, one of the key ways that we empower this is helping organizations get that trusted data layer in place. Like we're seeing a lot of folks in the market right now starting to kind of pilot or try agents, and one of the kind of missteps that I see from our point of view is that they just plug it on top of their operational tools. So if I put an AI agent right on top of Salesforce or right on top of HubSpot or my ERP system, et cetera, I think there's some productivity gains there. The problem always becomes when you start to ask it cross-system questions, it's not going to be able to answer them very accurately. So if I wanted to say, how did my marketing campaigns convert into sales, from my CRM to my ERP system, now all of a sudden that agent has to know how to go join those tables, et cetera. By creating this, kind of unified data layer and then training the agent, you can now get a much higher confidence level that it's going to answer those questions properly. And so I do think it's one of the risks of agents is, okay, if people are acting on, I'll call it bad information or created information, same as if an analyst brought you a report that was just totally wrong, right? Like, hey, if I'm going to use this information, I've got to be confident that it's actually how my business is operating. And so I think that's one of the key areas is that, in my point of view, Fivetran helps us get there quickly. Interloop helps you get there reliably and in a trustworthy way. And then ultimately you plug the agentic AI on top of that to get that productivity gain as an organization. So the ones that we're seeing that are doing this the best are being very intentional about it. They're putting a plan together, they're implementing the plan, they're testing and validating that's working, rather than the, quickly just plugging it on top of tools. So I don't know, David, if that resonates or not, or for any other comments on that, but
yeah, that really sort of blends in right to where we are, right? So when you're training the model, when you're pulling all of that, you want as much data as possible, you want it as quickly as possible. That's obviously one of our benefits. The other thing, and I think the analogy of like an agent being like an employee of the company, you want that agent employee always to be working on the latest data. And so keeping that data up to sync, whether that's for contextual or whether that's like the actual business process itself, is actually going to be a big point, and I think is going to be a requirement where we, for years, have said the real-time enterprise. We're going to get there. Fivetran is a tool to make that happen. And then I think the other thing is you've got agents who are going to be running on top of OneLake, right? But you also have all of these peripheral tools, like was in the demo, like Salesforce, they have their own agents. And so they need their own data or the correct data to go and access on. So the ability to push that data out to those end platforms or wherever the agent is running is also going to be really key and something that Fivetran is focused on. So a lot of synergies, and I think this is going to be an interesting space.
Great. Okay, next question we have is, do I need to know SQL to use the data agent? And if all right with you both, I think I can take this question because of the demo.
absolutely.
And the short answer is no, but the proper answer is you should have a basic understanding. So what's very cool about Microsoft is that they've enabled Copilot for all SKUs within Fabric. So for a very small amount of money, you can have access to Copilot within your Fabric instance. And when you go to use the SQL Analytics endpoint of a Lakehouse to, query the data, there's a little button at the top that says Copilot, and a panel pops up on the side, and you can ask questions about your Lakehouse, like write me a SQL query to determine the top sales in Australia for 2012. And then you can turn around and check that that query works by running it against the Lakehouse. And then you can use that as an example within the data agent that I showed you. What's also cool about the data agent is if you have an engineering team that has created all of these really great, robust SQL queries for reporting or analytics in the past, you can upload those as examples through a JSON file as examples to the data agent. So do you need to know SQL? No, because you have access to Copilot. But will it make the experience in your agent more reliable and better to be understood? Yes. Hopefully that is a good answer there. And the next question we have is, there are a lot of data movement tools out there. So why Fivetran?
Awesome. So this goes back to the first slide, right? So our ultimate goal, again, the agent requires all the data. If you are 60 years away from having all of that data in effort, that's 60 years worth of waiting, whether that's, true 60 years or however that is, that you'll be waiting for that data to turn into an AI advantage for your business. And so, going from 60 to 4 years to load the same amount of data is a significant business benefit. Yes, I can go and talk about the technical pieces, why Fivetran, But I think that alone and an organization's move to AI and the speed they want to do it is really going to be the driving reason why Fivetran is going to be, the tool to go and make, enable these AI projects.
Great. And I think we have time for one more question here before we wrap up. So you mentioned the concept of smart sync. Can you describe this a bit more and what it does?
Yeah, maybe I can start with that one. And like I mentioned, we've partnered with a company called Census, which actually just recently acquired by Fivetran. So now one and the same, which is exciting. But you can almost think about it as kind of the reverse version of Fivetran. So Fivetran's getting data into the lake house. Smart Sync is kind of our branded version of this, is now getting that data out of the lake house into those operational tools. So, a good example I like to use is like customer loyalty programs. So imagine you've got different customers at different tiers. Let's say, a platinum customer or a VIP type customer. It took a lot of different data to determine whether they meet that criteria. Maybe it's spend, maybe it's, activity with you, maybe it's some other elements that all drive towards that, platinum status. You want to then actually push that value back into your customer service tool so that when that customer calls in, you can see that they're at a platinum status and they've spent 400K with us this year. That data is now contextually available to those field people that are actually dealing with the customer on a daily basis. And so that's what we see a lot of times with reverse ETL, or what we call smart sync, is empowering those people with the answers they need. We're seeing kind of different elements of that, whether it, rather than them having to ask the question and get the answer, it's really just presented to them in that moment. So a little bit of a operational gain there as well. And I don't know, Dave, if you want to comment on kind of the combination of things, but it's a unique use case, but we often see a lot of business value in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the big thing, right? So as I said earlier on, agents are going to be running on there, or employees are going to be using that data in Salesforce. You need that data to be up to date from the source of truth, which becomes OneLake. From a data movement perspective, it's actually, in some respects, a harder problem to solve, because from a database, I have everything I need to go and push that data, and I know that I can append it to a table or do an update statement within that database. If I'm going to Salesforce, if I'm going to any of these SaaS-based apps, I don't have that. I have a custom API and a custom object model that I need to manage, and I need to manage things such as, how do I resolve which record is the truth? How do I overwrite? When do I overwrite? All of those things. So it's a big problem that customers will have to go and move that data out there, that, our acquisition of Census, who that's all they focused on for, 24/7, now allows us to be sort of the data movement tool from source through to the data lake, back to the source again. And the way that I see it is kind of like when you drive your car in the morning, you have a button in the dashboard that says recirculate the air. We're doing exactly the same thing for data, where we're just constantly improving it and making that better for your end agents.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to present today. If there's any questions that we didn't get the opportunity to answer, please feel free to email us directly and we'll be happy to correspond and get those answers out to you. But I'm going to hand it back over to Jordan for wrap up.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, David, for being here. I thought this was a really great conversation. A lot of really interesting topics raised. We know that this can be a challenging journey if you're just getting started. And so one of the things at Interloop that we've put together is what we call our Fabric Success Kit. So if you are getting started with Fabric or considering it as your tool of choice, we've got what we call our Success Kit. It's a free resource that you can access. It's got some best practices, some guides, some tools that you can use with your team. One of the key elements of that is how do you get the data into OneLake, and so I think that's where Fivetran plays a key piece. But feel free to scan this QR code to get direct access, or you can check it out on our website. But want to just give a value add to those that have attended here today, is to be able to access these resources and take advantage of some of these tools to get started. And with that, just want to thank everybody for attending. Really appreciate, David and Fivetran team supporting this and partnering with us, and hope everyone uses some of the information they learned today to go out and solve some data challenges. So.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.